Um, so today, thank you for coming, members of the media, and here's kind of the lay of the land. We have some representatives of some of our coalition members here representing those folks, and then we're going to have three speakers today. ACLU of Iowa Legal Director Rita Bettis, Betty Andrews with the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP, and Bonnie Pitts, who's the past president with the League of Women Voters of Iowa. There's a list of coalition members. You got the press release. There's a letter that the coalition members signed on to that sort of spells out what we are going to be working for. There's also a newly created website, Restore Votes Iowa. A link to that is on the press conference, or on the press release, so look for it there. After these three fine folks speak, we'll open it up to questions. Thanks.
So thank you all for coming. As Veronica mentioned, I'm Rita Bettis. I'm the legal director for the ACLU. And we are so pleased to announce this coalition to end felony disenfranchisement in Iowa. We are incredibly thankful for the work and commitment of our partners, especially the League of Women Voters of Iowa and the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP, who will also make remarks. Our coalition so far is 17 organizations and growing by the minute. As we all head to the polls this November, it's important to remember those who have been left behind. Voting rights are the foundation of citizenship, but for more than 50,000 Iowans, a number that grows daily, they remain unable to vote, even though they have completed their sentences and have rejoined their communities. Iowa has an absolute crisis when it comes to felony disenfranchisement. We have the harshest voting laws in the country for people who have discharged their sentences. That means that our fellow Iowans who have long since rebuilt their lives following a nonviolent drug offense, for example, who are our family members, our neighbors, cannot vote for members of their child's school board, are unable to vote on local measures, or help choose our next president. This system is unjust. It leads to the systemic, disproportionate disenfranchisement of Black Iowans, leaving them without a voice in our political process. As the ACLU and Human Rights Watch report just announced last week, in Iowa, we have among the worst racial disparities in our criminal justice system in the country. And through felony disenfranchisement, many Black Iowans are in a catch-22. Because of felony disenfranchisement, they are denied a political voice to change the very laws which are so negatively impacting them. And Black communities in Iowa, as a result, are systematically underrepresented in our state democratic system. And it's important to realize who we're talking about. Not all felonies are alike. 85% of all felony convictions in the state of Iowa are classified by the state of Iowa as nonviolent. The restoration of voting rights also promotes public safety. Recidivism in Iowa, sadly, is going up. Any government policy which has reducing recidivism as one of its goals needs to recognize the proven, clear, demonstrated link between voting rights and reduced rates of reoffending. So here's what we're proposing specifically. A constitutional amendment to finally get rid of felony disenfranchisement from our state constitution for good. Because that is such a long process in Iowa, however, we also think it's important to pursue state legislation now. Current Iowa statute defines infamous crime, which is the type of crime that leads to a permanent voting ban for life under our state constitution, as any and every felony. They're all treated the same. Instead, we propose that infamous crime be defined in that statute as only forcible felonies. That standard is consistent with existing framework in the Iowa law and the way that we classify crimes currently. And it's also a matter of common sense to treat less serious and nonviolent offenses less harshly. We also propose that the period of infamy or disenfranchisement be limited in duration to the period in which a person is actually serving their sentence, after which their right to vote should be restored. We believe that this is a common sense proposal to modernize Iowa's laws consistent with all of our basic sense of fairness in the state. But ultimately, because the Griffin decision gave us no good answers as to what, if any, legislative definitions for which crimes, which felony offenses would be infamous, that it would uphold under the Constitution, we must keep the constitutional amendment in mind as our long-term goal. So thank you, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker, Betty Andrews, with the Iowa-Nebraska chapter of the NAACP.
Thank you, Rita. I am very pleased to be here. Again, my name is Betty Andrews, and I am the president of the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP. And I am here really just to give support to the coalition. This is an issue that the NAACP has been battling for years and years and years. And several years ago, we were successful in getting the governor to at least streamline the application for voter disenfranchisement or re-enfranchisement. And what I would like to emphasize is that we're looking for justice here. This is a situation where people have already served their time, justice has been exacted, and this is and what is happening with voter disenfranchisement is that people are continuing to suffer the collateral damage. They're wearing scarlet letters on their back. This is preventing a lot of opportunity for people. And as Rita said so eloquently, the African American community suffers gravely in that this is alienating about 7% of Iowa's eligible voters that are African Americans. So what we're saying, and if I could just borrow a phrase, that is that we need to tear down this wall. Iowa has been at the top of so many disparities, and it's really a shame that we are not taking radical steps to make changes for our citizens, for all of our citizens. And so if we as a state can tear down and remove this barrier, it will certainly progress us all the more. So thank you. The NAACP is in full support of the ACLU's and the coalition's proposals. And we certainly hope that our governor, our legislature, and our citizens will be in support as well. Thank you very much. Tear down this wall.
I'm Bonnie Pitts, past president of the League of Women Voters of Iowa. And I'm here to show our support for the coalition and the work that the ACLU is doing. The League of Women Voters of Iowa registers voters all year long. And one of the things we discover is how many people want to register to vote but cannot because of a felony conviction in their past. The League supports making a change legislatively and eventually through a constitutional amendment here in Iowa. Because we are one of 3 states that permanently disenfranchise felons, a change is needed. At a candidate forum last week, for 2 state representative seats, the question about felon voting was raised. All 4 candidates were supportive of changes that allow felons to regain their voting rights. They were very familiar with young people who made a mistake and were felons, but now we're more mature, hardworking, tax-paying, and raising their families. Some felons are servicemen or women who self-medicate with illicit drugs because of the trauma of service to our country. They deserve to have their voting rights restored. Children in these families do not learn citizenship only in a school setting, but by the actions and beliefs of their families. Let parents act as role models and demonstrate the importance of citizenship and voting. We should give them a chance to discuss political views, their part in the political process, and ultimately vote. It makes sense to encourage maximum participation in our political process. The League will actively work so that Iowa citizens with a felony conviction can have their voting rights restored after serving time in probation. Again, we're very much in support of this coalition. We look forward to working on this issue in the coming legislative session with our over 600 strong league members. Thank you.
So that's sort of what we're doing, and why we're doing it. Do you guys have any questions? At this point, we're also available immediately after.
Has the legislation been drafted yet?
Why didn't you answer that, Rita?
Well, no legislation has been drafted for the coming legislative session. Of course, we haven't even had an election to determine who the legislators will be, but we have drafted what our proposal is, and Veronica has copies of that, which I think she's handed out, but it's also on the website for everybody to see, which is www.restorevotesiowa.com. And we have both the constitutional amendment and the specific legislation that we're proposing there.
I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to be clear. Would either the constitutional amendment or the proposed legislation allow people who are incarcerated to vote?
Yes. So Iowa already allows people who are serving sentences for non-infamous crimes to vote by absentee ballot. And that happens across both jails and prisons for people who are serving time for any aggravated misdemeanor, for example. So for people convicted of non-violent offenses that are not infamous, if this is adopted, they would be able to vote. Yes?
So let's say, in a world of hypotheticals, if you got the legislature to say, yeah, okay, we're gonna redefine infamous crimes with the caveat that we don't want people who are incarcerated or on parole or probation, would you be willing to negotiate on some of these points?
That would be an incredible movement in the right direction, and we would support that. Yes. We'd keep pushing for this ultimate goal of ending felony disenfranchisement, which is out of step with the trend in the country and is fundamentally unjust and doesn't reflect the way that we think about recidivism and integrating people back into society or voting and citizenship writ large. But absolutely, we would support that as progress.
I'm sure you've all heard this, but for anyone who'd like to address it, the governor's stance on this is that paying whatever legal fees and fines, he considers that part of paying that debt to society, and that the sentence isn't complete until that has been finalized. Just wondering if anybody wanted to address that.
Sure, that interpretation is inconsistent with all sorts of legal precedent. It also obviously imposes, in effect, what is a poll tax. For most people who are coming out with criminal convictions looking to rebuild their lives, their struggles are immense already. In order to find jobs and housing and be able to participate as citizens in their community, we need to be making that process easier, not harder. For lots of people, it's just impossible that they're able to even be current on those, much less pay them off fully. So it's a way of privileging people who have wealth, who are convicted of crimes, and allowing them to have those rights of citizenship, which we all enjoy. But not allowing people convicted of the very same offenses or less serious offenses to be able to vote simply because they're less wealthy. And that's not something that is consistent with Iowa values at all. Good question. And yes, Representative Anderson.
Hi, Rita.
Hi. Great to see you.
I fully support this, but I do believe that it's not terribly accurate to say that they've done their time, paid their dues, etc., because oftentimes, as you say, they haven't been able to pay their restitution and their fines yet, and a lot of times their sentence was significantly shortened while they were in prison. Having said that, this is the only just thing to do. Nobody should be disenfranchised or should have a poll tax or should, for any reason, be kept from voting because of a crime.
Thank you. Well said. Anybody have any questions for some of our other speakers? Or for some of our other coalition members who are also here with us?
I've never heard it referred to as a poll tax, but I find that an interesting concept. Would you?
Well, so I think it works as a concept, right? Legally, it's a harder argument to make, or we would have made it, because we're talking about people who the 14th Amendment, at least so far, allows to be disenfranchised for conviction of a crime. So they're sort of getting not too legally wonky. I can always feel Veronica get nervous when I start talking about like legal cases and stuff.
It's all good.
They
It's
go
all
into
good.
the weeds. But that is really based on people who have a recognized legal right to vote, and then not imposing a cost in order for them to exercise it, which is a little bit different than what we're talking about here, but it functions the exact same way.
In
So
fact,
it's a barrier.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a barrier.
well, and could you explain, because I've heard some people say, well, what if they only have to pay $15? That's not very much. Can you explain to us why it can be an awful lot?
Sure. And what I'd like to do maybe is just talk about, I think a lot of people know we were able to successfully get Kelly's right to vote back, our client, Kelly Griffin, after her legal case was denied by the Iowa Supreme Court. And I'd like to talk just for a minute about what that process was like so you can understand. So she obviously had the assistance of an attorney with the ACLU who knows the system in and out. And it took us over a week to get the criminal history report alone. And that, of course, cost $15. We also had to get her financial records from the courts of her conviction, which takes time and money. And then we had to pull together all of the documents needed to be referenced and included in the application process itself. Had we been charging her, which of course we wouldn't and didn't, because that was included as part of our pro bono representation, she would have paid around $1,000 in attorney's fees. And it took us over 2 weeks just to get the application together with the assistance of an attorney. It took the governor's office almost a month when they had the fully completed application to then grant her the right to vote back. And that is very quick. What we hear from a lot of other people is that it takes at least a month. In some cases, it takes more like 3 months. And we know if you look at the rates, it's less than 1% of all people who have discharged their sentences. So we're not talking about people still on probation and parole. We're talking about people who have discharged their sentences, are able to navigate the governor's process. So it's incredibly intimidating. It takes a long time. And it's really scary. So imagine if you have a felony conviction and you are not particularly sophisticated, and what you see at the bottom of this application to get your right to vote restored is that you're signing under the penalty of perjury. And all of the questions are these really legally detailed things, and you just don't want to make a mistake. And part of why you don't want to make a mistake is because you're aware of people like our client, Kelly Griffin, who believed that she could vote, and a lot of other people who were charged with voting fraud in the state who believed that they could vote, because in some cases they were told that by their attorneys, because that had been the system in Iowa under automatic restoration. They go to the polls, they cast a ballot. Turns out they were wrong, and they were charged with and prosecuted for voter fraud. So the stakes are really, really high, and for most people, they're just not willing to take that risk until they have the assistance of an attorney. And the idea of paying an attorney to assist them with this process, upwards of $1,000, is just completely unreasonable for people.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. I think all three folks will be available,
Thank
as
you.
well as our coalition partners, for any more questions after, for any clarification. There's our alarm. Thanks.
Sorry. Don't people know they shouldn't call me when I'm.
I don't know what I mean, let's.
I put a coalition of citizens.
You know, we're a coalition. Media.
Sure.
Comes over and eats West Acres.
So, we have the ACLU.
If you get a dinner invitation, I get to see it.
We're gonna all.
A free supper.
I will.
Okay?
Well, I hope I